I am a semi-retired actress, joining a reality show about divorce with my powerful business tycoon husband. I want a divorce. Facing the camera, I calmly announce my decision. Behind the scenes, Nicholas frowns and reviews my performance with me. When you say it, show more emotion. That way, it'll spark discussion, create buzz, and attract views. Otherwise, who's going to believe you actually want a divorce? They'll just think you're acting again. Use your head more. I can't always be guiding you, right? In the public eye, I'm just a beautiful, shallow trophy wife. He's the brilliant cultural entrepreneur worth billions. No one believes I'd willingly give up the title of Mrs. Wang, not even Nicholas. But he doesn't know. This time, I really want a divorce. Chapter 1. When my agent informed me about joining the divorce reality show, I was momentarily taken aback. Mr. Wang agreed? Of course. She seemed to find my question amusing. Your last few live sales didn't perform too well, and divorcing female celebrities are trending right now. Mr. Wang has even cleared his schedule to spend 10 days on the show with you. Make the most of this and catch the wave. At least show some gratitude for Mr. Wang's investment in you. I stayed silent. Investment. Interesting choice of word. It feels like a boss to an employee, a mentor to a student, a business partner to a collaborator, anything but a husband to a wife. Sign it, she said, tossing the contract in front of me. I didn't move, my gaze fixed on the thin stack of paper. She glanced at me, a faint, mocking smile playing on her lips. Relax. It's not a real divorce. I'll go through the show details first. I'll let you know once it's signed. Slowly, I picked up the contract, gripping it in my hands. She frowned, her tone a little impatient. Mr. Wang already reviewed it. As I stood up to leave, her voice floated casually behind me. Why make things so complicated? You're going to sign it in the end. Chapter 2. That evening, Nicholas called. The deep, magnetic tone of his voice sounded oddly unfamiliar to me. His company had recently launched a new project, and I hadn't seen him for 2 months. His phone was usually with his assistant, Roxana, who screened calls before he'd take them. So, typically, I didn't bother reaching out. Helen. There was soft music playing in the background on his end. I heard you were being difficult today. I paused. Heard? From whom? He sounded displeased. I've been busy lately. I don't have time or energy to coach you, but you need to be mature about this. Work is work. Show some professionalism instead of acting like a child. I responded with a quiet, "Oh, you mean the reality show?" Word got to you so quickly, seems my agent reported me to Roxana. And by difficult, you mean because I said I'd read the contract before signing? There was a 2-second silence before he replied, his tone now weary. You didn't even finish college. What do you know about reading contracts? Everything's been arranged for you. All you need to do is sign. Everyone's already exhausted. So why add to their troubles? Helen, when will you grow up? There it was. That tone again. Every time I failed to follow his expectations. Every time I expressed my own views. This was the attitude I'd face from him. A subtle reproach, mixed with a hint of resignation and disappointment. The familiar suffocating feeling rose from within, pressing against my chest, clogging my throat. I was momentarily speechless. Mr. Wang. Beside him, a soft, pleasant female voice broke in. I think I can guess what Mrs. Wang might be concerned about. It was Roxana. Nicholas said nothing. His silence was never disagreement. Roxana let out a couple of charming laughs, then continued smoothly. After all, this is a show about divorce. Mrs. Wang has to say the word divorce in front of a national audience. And given how much she loves you, she's naturally worried that if this all backfires, it'll be difficult to contain. So, Mr. Wang, this is actually on you. You didn't take Mrs. Wang's feelings into account. You were a bit too straightforward. It's understandable if she's upset. I was a little taken aback. Not only did she assume my feelings but also concluded I was upset. And she was saying Nicholas was in the wrong. She was pointing out the fault of the always composed, powerful Nicholas. I couldn't help but be curious about his reaction. On the phone, Nicholas was quiet for a moment before letting out a low hum. Roxana's right, Helen. I didn't consider things carefully enough. In that moment, I let out a silent laugh. It was deep autumn outside. The last few leaves on the sycamore tree were silently swept away by the chill wind. Still, we are more than husband and wife, we're partners in multiple cross-holdings across several companies. Divorce would be entirely counterproductive. A concern like this is excessive if you just think about it logically. Helen, we've been together 5 years. I thought you'd have learned by now to analyze things rationally. You should focus and learn from Roxana. Roxana and I were the same age, both 27. We met Nicholas the same year. But unlike me, she came from an academic family. Graduated from Stanford, quick-witted and poised, embodying the elegance of a beautiful intellectual. I, on the other hand, had come from a humble background and left college early to pursue acting. My fame was built on beauty alone, with the world's verdict being beautiful, but with no depth. I once thought Nicholas would choose her. Nicholas paused, waiting for me to admit my mistake and reflect. Just like every other time, he would unerringly highlight my shallow views and immature mindset, and I would respond by reflecting sincerely, promising to improve. But this time, I didn't say a word. The only sound on the line was the unending music playing softly in the background. After a moment, I asked, "Did you have me on speakerphone?" In our 4 years of marriage, one of the few arguments we'd had was when I had once called him affectionately, only to hear Roxana laughing in the background. I later discovered he had me on speaker. Humiliated, I cried and made him promise it wouldn't happen again. Back then, our relationship had still been good. He'd agreed. Helen, Nicholas seemed to remember. Roxana had a bit to drink at a dinner. I was driving with navigation. So, it's fine. I was just asking. I let out a casual laugh, my gaze falling on the signature at the end of the contract. The bold, confident strokes seemed both familiar and foreign. "I'll sign it and give it to my agent tomorrow." Nicholas was pleased. Pleased that I didn't push the issue about Roxana. Pleased that, once again, I had obediently accepted his arrangement. "You've always wanted to go to Altai. When this is all over, I'll take you. We'll see." I hung up. Chapter 3. 2 months after our last encounter, Nicholas and I finally met again. This time on set, my agent had brought me, and Roxana was with him. 2 cars approached from opposite directions, and our doors opened simultaneously. He was on an earpiece, in a perfectly tailored suit, his profile sharply defined. Roxana stood by in a dark blue belted trench coat, her long hair blowing in the breeze. I tilted my head, observing them. I had to admit, they looked like a perfect pair. My agent left my side to greet him with a broad smile. "Mr. Wang," Roxana only nodded faintly, signaling not to interrupt. Without sparing me a glance, there they stood, the 3 of them. Here I was, unloading my own luggage. The cars weren't far apart, but it felt like there was an ocean between us. I pushed my luggage inside first, and the other 2 couples were already seated on the sofas. One pair was a musical duo, the other, a regular couple. I smiled and greeted them. Through the large glass window, I could clearly see Roxana bending down to button Nicholas's suit, her face near his lower torso, her long hair blown around her waist by the wind, an intimacy that suggested more than it showed. The woman from the regular couple, brash and outspoken, nudged toward them, then bluntly asked, "Are you 2 divorcing because of her?" I chuckled. No. The 4 inside didn't seem convinced, casting sideways glances. Nicholas walked in, surrounded by staff. He saw me, approached, and sat beside me, a hint of displeasure in his expression. "Why didn't you wait for me?" I peeled an orange from the table. "I came in first to get familiar with the process. Don't want to keep the show waiting." He turned to look at me, faintly surprised. After all, I was someone who, in his presence, constantly made subtle claims to my territory. For the first 2 decisions, be firm about wanting a divorce. Only on the final choice should you hesitate. That's where the shift happens. He gave a low, cautionary reminder. I nodded and put the orange slice in my mouth. It was incredibly sweet. Chapter 4. The script devised by my agent went like this. I want a divorce. He doesn't. He joins the show to understand my feelings and save our marriage. After arguments and reconciliations, I finally admit that his career focus has left me feeling neglected. He sincerely apologizes, promising to prioritize family from now on. In the end, I tearfully confess that I still love him, and we forego the divorce, reuniting happily ever after. Pretty fake, to be honest. Noticing my frown, my agent sneered at me. Or do you actually want to make it real? I'd once asked Nicholas to assign me a new agent, but Roxana opposed it, claiming my agent had valuable connections and exceptional professionalism. Nicholas had sided with her, reminding me to put work first and not be so willful. She clearly didn't like me. And, of course, I didn't like her. On the first day, there was no filming, just pre-show interviews. In the interview room, each couple made their first choice. I want a divorce. Facing the camera, I calmly uttered those words. Nicholas frowned beside me. When you say it, put more emotion into it. That way, it'll spark discussion, create a topic, and attract views. Otherwise, no one will believe you actually want to divorce me. They'll just assume you're acting. Think before you act. I can't always be here to guide you. I opened my mouth, wanting to respond, but a heavy sense of helplessness weighed down on me, and I lost the urge to say anything. For the past 2 years, this feeling had often enveloped me, like a tight shroud, suffocating me. I knew I needed to break free, yet somehow lacked the strength to do it. When my inner strength fell short, external forces had to come into play. The director was a very young man, with a refreshing air of innocence untouched by worldly cynicism. He watched the playback. It came across well. After all, you're an experienced actress. The emotions really came through. When Nicholas had his solo interview, I waited outside, not wanting to hear it. My phone rang. It was Roxana. I considered just ignoring it but then decided to pick up. He's almost done with his interview. Call him a bit later. Mrs. Wang. I'm not calling him. I'm calling you. Me? Yes. It's just that Mr. Wang has never been away from me for several consecutive days. So there are a few things I need to remind you about. Her tone was soft and polite. I glanced over at Nicholas, who was just coming out of the door, and put the call on speaker. Go ahead. Roxana's refined voice filled the hallway. First, Mr. Wang's chronic throat inflammation has flared up recently. I put his medicine in the inner pocket of his black bag. Make sure he avoids cold or spicy foods. They'll irritate his throat. Secondly, he occasionally gets migraines at night. Remember to massage his temples for at least 10 minutes if that happens. If you're unsure about the technique, feel free to call me anytime. Mrs. Wang, did you get all that? Before I could answer, Nicholas snatched the phone from my hand, his tone icy. Roxana, who told you to call Helen? There was sudden silence on the other end. I found it somewhat amusing, and before I knew it, I actually laughed. Nicholas looked at me, confusion in his scrutinizing gaze. In the past, I would have thrown a fit in this situation, berating Roxana in anger and crying to Nicholas in frustration. Roxana would always stay calm, gently explaining in her refined tone, making me look like the crazy one. She was only trying to help. You're scaring her with that tone. I took the phone back from him, hung up, and walked straight to the interview room. Next up was the joint interview. As I opened the door, Nicholas was still standing by the hallway window, and suddenly he called after me. You don't mind? I looked at him. Mind what? A faint frustration flickered in his steady gaze. Nothing. Let's go in. Chapter 5. The director told us we could answer freely during the joint interview. They would later edit out whatever seemed useful. First question, what's the most touching thing the other person has done for you? Nicholas sat casually, radiating calm elegance with a touch of warmth, maintaining his usual public image. With a gentle smile, he replied, marriage represents eternity, a shared journey through thick and thin. It's built on countless little moments. If it relied on a single touching moment, it'd be fragile and unstable. So, for me, there isn't a most touching moment, just a collection of warm memories. The director raised an eyebrow and turned to me. Ms. Helen, what about you? No memorable moments? I do have one. I thought for a moment. When I was 21, I was trapped in a contract dispute that almost ended my career. He stepped in, fought hard, and paid a large settlement to get me out. That was the most touching thing he's done, the director commented. Looks like Mr. Wang is someone who achieves results without seeking credit. Nicholas gave a modest wave. Helen has talent as an actress. And as a young, naive person who ran into trouble, I was in a position to lend a hand. It wasn't a big deal. Second question, what do you think you've brought to each other over the years? This time, Ms. Helen, you first. I remained silent for a long time. Nicholas chuckled. She's slow to respond, so I'll go first. Not to be immodest, but what I've brought to Helen has been worth billions. Her education level is low. She entered the workforce young, lacking in understanding and refinement. I'm 5 years older, with more experience and depth of thought. I've taken time to guide her and help her understand deeper aspects of life and social dynamics. Honestly, I sometimes envy her. If I'd had someone like that by my side at her age, how fortunate I would have been. The director was silent for a moment. Ms. Helen, what about you? I responded calmly. Nothing. The director raised his eyebrows, surprised. You've known each other for 6 years, married for 4, not a single thing? That's right, nothing, I repeated coolly. Nicholas's brow furrowed. The atmosphere grew tense. The director looked between us. All right, on to the third question. Over the years, what's the one thing you regret most? Nicholas cleared his throat and spoke slowly. My biggest regret would probably be spending too much time on work these past 2 years. Neglecting Helen. He turned to me, his gaze softening. We don't have any fundamental conflicts. The only issue has been my workload, but I'm aware of it now. And that's why I'm here on this show. Helen, don't be impulsive. Any problem can be solved. We're nowhere near the point of needing a divorce. I didn't respond. I stared straight into the camera, then spoke in a detached tone. If I had to name my biggest regret, it would be the time I kneeled before him. The director, cameraman, and lighting crew all stared wide-eyed. Nicholas's face darkened instantly. Helen, you've forgotten the rule about not saying too much. He spoke coldly. If you're going to be this stubborn, there's no point in continuing this show. The director blinked, then quickly smiled, attempting to smooth things over. Maybe we'll skip this one and move to the final question? I gave a barely audible sigh. All right. Within seconds, Nicholas's face returned to calm, regaining his poised demeanor. He nodded with a smile. Please continue. Final question. Please answer simultaneously. Do you still love each other? The director's gaze was sharp, waiting for our response. Of course I do. I don't. Nicholas stiffened, turning abruptly to look at me. Chapter 6. After the interview, we walked down the hallway toward the living area. Nicholas was in front, silent. Just before reaching the corner, he suddenly stopped and turned around. Why did you say that? I had been admiring my figure in the mirror on the right wall. After eating and sleeping well recently, I'd finally put on a little weight, and I was quite pleased with the curves I saw. I walked right into his back. Which part? I asked, confused. His lips tightened as he hesitated. The part about not loving me anymore. I rubbed my nose, which had bumped into him. Didn't you say to express emotion more intensely? He didn't respond, just looked at me with furrowed brows, expressionless. I brushed past him. The show producers were fairly considerate, not installing cameras in the bedrooms. I stood in front of the large double bed, lost in thought. Nicholas and I had been sleeping in separate rooms for a year now. It started with our argument over switching agents, when he rejected my request, taking Roxana's advice instead. I couldn't accept it. One night, when he came back late and tried to get close, I turned him away. Nicholas was a man of strong physical needs. When we first married, he was nearly insatiable, his passion for my body boundless. In those tender moments, he would lower his guard, murmuring sweet promises. Helen, you're mine, every inch of you. I can still remember the way he looked that night, standing shirtless by the bed, staring at me coldly. Don't want to? Then let it be as you wish. From that night on, he moved to the guest room. For countless nights, I hid under the covers, crying, fantasizing that he'd come in, gently hold me, and comfort me. Helen, I missed you. Let's stop being angry, okay? But he never did. Once, in a moment of weakness, I came up with an excuse to go to the guest room to talk to him. He responded normally, objectively addressing my question, but when it was time, he'd look at me calmly and say, "I'm going to sleep. Anything else?" After that, I stopped going. In time, I got used to sleeping alone. When Nicholas emerged from the bathroom, I was already in bed, wrapped up in the blanket. The bed was big, and I clung to the edge. It wasn't all that hard to get used to. I'd expected to feel unsettled or sleepless, but I fell asleep surprisingly quickly when I felt his large hand sliding around my waist and slipping under my clothes. My eyes flew open, shocked. I turned to look at him. He kissed me forcefully, his breath hot and heavy, tinged with something furious. My body went rigid, and instinctively, I tried to pull away. He noticed my movement and paused briefly before intensifying his actions. As though angry, his grip unyielding, my clothes were half torn. "Nicholas, stop!" I shouted. He stopped. What does stop mean? He sounded restrained, almost through gritted teeth. "You don't want this? After so long, you don't?" I pushed him away, quickly fixing my clothes and getting out of bed. In the dim moonlight streaming through the window, I could see his red-rimmed eyes, staring at me intensely. Standing by the bed, I looked at him the same way he had looked at me that night. "Sorry. I'm not used to it anymore." We stood there in tense silence. Suddenly, he slammed his fist against the bed, grabbed his clothes, and stormed out. Chapter 7. The next day was a group activity filming session for all the couples. As I entered the dining room, I heard the others talking. The ordinary man was saying, "I heard from the staff that Mr. Wang slept on the sofa outside last night. I thought celebrities on these divorce shows were just acting for attention, but they seem to be serious." The ordinary woman sighed. "If I had such a rich husband, I wouldn't care if he was around or not, or even how many mistresses he had. As long as he provided enough money, I'd be fine with personally taking care of any mistresses post-birth." "So you're saying I don't make enough money now? Isn't it obvious? Can you match even one of his toes?" The singer husband chimed in kindly. "Every family has its own struggles. It's understandable." The singer wife, known for her sharp tongue and constant jabs at her husband, added, "Understand? Not me. If you married for money, and now complain about not getting emotional support, isn't that just wanting everything?" I stepped in. The ordinary couple and singer husband looked at me awkwardly, smiling. The singer wife scoffed, hugging her guitar as she strutted out of the room. The singer husband stood up, looking embarrassed. "She's got a quick mouth. Sorry about that." "Don't take it to heart," I smiled, asking, "Which one of you wants the divorce?" The singer husband answered quietly, "I do." I nodded. "Not hard to guess." The ordinary woman called out loudly, "Ms. Helen." "I apologize too," the ordinary man quickly echoed. "Me too." I waved them off, smiling. "No worries. We wouldn't be here if there weren't problems." The three nodded furiously. "Exactly. We're here because of incompatible personalities. We fight over money constantly. Both of us want out." Afterward, they looked at me. I spread my hands and shrugged. "I just don't love him anymore." They all burst out laughing. "Sister Helen, I used to think you were so high and mighty, but you're actually really nice." The ordinary woman came over and wrapped her arm around mine, staring at me intently. "And you're even more beautiful than you look on screen." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched. For years, following Nicholas's belief that actors need distance to better craft their roles, I had avoided fan meetups, stayed off social media, and wore only luxury brands. When I suddenly started doing live sales, the public's reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Out of money and here to make a cash grab. She thinks she's above it all because of a few movies. But here she is selling $19.99 laundry detergent. Just another failed attempt to squeeze into high society. Now being used as a tool. These past 2 years, my life has been filled with a barrage of such negativity. There's been constant criticism, rebuke, and rejection from Nicholas. And, thanks to his attitude, scorn and disdain from those around him. It had been a long time since anyone had given me genuine praise. Once, I'd been known as the Queen of Smiles for my bright, radiant grin. Sister Helen, isn't that the woman who came with Mr. Wang yesterday? The ordinary woman suddenly pointed out, looking through the floor-to-ceiling window. I followed her gaze. Roxana was standing alone under a tree by the roadside. She'd clearly been there a long time. The chilly autumn wind blew, and she shivered in her thin trench coat. Her face pale. She looked pitiful. I couldn't help but wonder, where was Nicholas? Chapter 8. Our daytime filming task involved all three couples working together to prepare a rustic meal. At the gathering point near the riverside cabin, I saw Nicholas. He had his sleeves rolled up, revealing strong, muscular arms, wielding an axe to chop firewood. Each swing was forceful, almost as if he was venting. He glanced at me, then paused, seemingly waiting for me to approach. Instead, I turned and walked toward the kitchen. He threw the axe into the tree stump with a cold thud and called out, "Don't you have anything to say to me?" I looked back, tilting my head. "Oh, Roxana's here. She's outside waiting for you. You should go check on her. She's about to freeze." His expression tightened, frustration flashing across his face. His sharp gaze locked onto me. "I remember teaching you that everything should be done in moderation, haven't I?" I nodded. "I remember when you cut off all my resources for 6 months after my argument with Roxana. You were teaching me that lesson, so I'm very polite to her now, aren't I?" He looked at me silently, his gaze deepening. I met his stare calmly. After a moment, he lowered his eyes and rolled down his sleeves. "When someone makes a mistake, they have to face the consequences. Roxana is no exception. I treat everyone equally." Oh, but Roxana didn't seem to agree with his equal treatment. I was crouching by the riverbank washing vegetables when she appeared. Her eyes red as she called out, "Mrs. Wang." I was a little startled, glancing around. "We're filming. How did they let you come over?" That ordinary couple started fighting. "So everyone's over there." Before I could reply, she looked at me with a timid expression and continued, "Mrs. Wang, it was forward of me to call you yesterday. Mr. Wang already scolded me, and I wanted to apologize. I hope you won't take it to heart since I was just looking out for his well-being." I shook the water off the vegetables vigorously. "I didn't take it to heart. But Mr. Wang, he hasn't answered my calls since yesterday, hasn't replied to my messages, and he wouldn't see me this morning. Mrs. Wang, could you help me explain to him? Say a good word on my behalf?" Her normally poised and confident demeanor was gone, replaced by a delicate vulnerability that drew sympathy effortlessly. I couldn't help but feel a touch of admiration for her. There's an old saying that the virtuous should be as adaptable as a dragon and a serpent. She was truly a virtuous woman. Sure, she froze, as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. After all, I was the one who once pointed at her nose and accused her of ulterior motives, demanding Nicholas fire her. Her gaze turned deep as she stared at me. Looking back, her tactics seemed simplistic. It was just about angering me and then showing her calm and graceful demeanor in front of Nicholas, contrasting my craziness and bitterness. I used to fall for it every time, because I cared, because I had a weakness. Now, I was indifferent. "You're quite magnanimous." Nicholas's cold voice cut through the air. "Mr. Wang." Roxana turned, startled, taking 2 steps back. The narrow bridge left her with little room, and her foot slipped, throwing her off balance. In her panic, she reached out and grabbed my arm. Splash! Splash! We fell off opposite sides of the bridge, landing in the river. Roxana shrieked, thrashing in the water. Without a moment's hesitation, Nicholas dove toward her side. When a few staff members rushed over, he was pulling an unconscious Roxana to shore, holding her tightly. Meanwhile, I was clinging to the bridge, drenched and completely disheveled, pulling myself up in utter embarrassment. Everyone who had witnessed the scene looked awkward. The man who supposedly wanted to save his marriage had chosen to save another woman, without a second thought when his wife and the other woman fell into danger simultaneously. Anyone would feel a pang of sympathy for his wife. The way they looked at me held a trace of pity. Once he set Roxana down, Nicholas walked over to me. The icy river water had left his face slightly pale. "She has a fear of underwater spaces," he said quietly. I took a towel from a staff member and dried myself. After a while, I looked up. "So?" He didn't answer. His gaze fixed on me. "Nicholas. So what?" Chapter 9. The entire crew's attitude toward me had shifted. Before, everyone seemed skeptical about my wish for a divorce. Some thought I was just being dramatic. Others assumed it was all for show to revive my career. No one took my words seriously. Now, they may still not fully believe me, but there was a newfound sympathy. Couples in showbiz often have separate lives, and wealthy husbands seeking pleasure elsewhere are common. But it's rare to see someone like Nicholas being so blatant, disregarding his wife's dignity entirely. The director even worried I might walk off the show, but I acted as if nothing had happened, as if I'd been through this so many times it no longer fazed me. This only deepened people's empathy for me, thinking I must have endured a lot. The next few days of filming passed easily, with everyone speaking to me kindly. Even the sharp-tongued singer smiled at me. The crew arranged a separate room for Nicholas, so I slept better, with plenty of rest, wholesome food, and a beautiful environment, surrounded by friendly faces. I felt content, almost glowing. The ordinary woman couldn't help but marvel. "Sister Helen, you've become even more beautiful these past few days, and your figure is amazing, slim where you should be, curvy where it counts. How did you get it?" Her compliments warmed my heart, and I took off my branded bracelet and gave it to her. She slipped it on cheerfully, then looked at me with concern. "I just said a few words, and you're already giving me gifts? Sister Helen, are you that easily moved? Doesn't anyone ever compliment you?" I thought for a moment. Not for a long time. The ordinary woman was called away for filming, and when I turned around, I saw Nicholas leaning against the wall behind me, watching with a pensive expression. Later, he came to explain the incident on the bridge. Roxana had nearly drowned as a child, and she developed a severe phobia of water, which caused her to faint in tense situations. Her parents, both professors, had come to the company and asked Nicholas to be mindful of it. "You're a good swimmer." So in that situation, I had to prioritize her safety. I listened quietly and nodded in understanding. "You did the right thing. I have no objections." "You really feel that way?" "Of course," I replied earnestly. "You've always taught me to be mature, to look at things rationally, and not to act on impulse. You handled it the best way possible, and I don't have an issue with that." For some reason, though I was saying exactly what he'd always preached, he didn't look very satisfied. In fact, he seemed a little lost. Perhaps it was the change in everyone's attitude, or maybe it was his guilt toward me, but he became noticeably quieter. During group meals, he stopped his usual habit of critiquing and judging me. When we worked together on tasks, he'd take on the most grueling parts. During a night shoot, when he saw me sneeze, he even asked a crew member for a blanket and handed it to me. "Thank you," I said politely. "Helen, we're married." Under the night sky, his expression was softened. "There's no need to be so distant. A normal marriage wouldn't require the wife to call her husband through another woman, would it?" The singer's wife chimed in sarcastically. There was a segment where the wives discussed uncomfortable aspects of their marriages, and I openly mentioned a few, including this one. The women were shocked. Nicholas said nothing, merely pursing his lips as he picked up a pen and paper. "I'll write my number for you. You can reach me directly from now on." He quickly scribbled it down and offered me the slip. I didn't take it. Instead, I tightened the blanket around myself and gazed up at the distant stars. "No need. There's nothing urgent." His hand froze midair. A gust of wind picked up the paper, and it floated away, disappearing into the night. That day's filming ended with the second round of marital choices. He chose stay. I chose leave, exactly as he had instructed me beforehand. On the way back, he seemed even more withdrawn. As we were each entering our rooms, he suddenly turned and said, "Helen, my throat's been really sore lately. Nicholas has allergic pharyngitis, and it always flares up when the seasons change. Every time it acted up, I would spend hours simmering a special tea for him, gently encouraging him to drink it each morning and reminding him to drink it again at night, even if he was away on business. I'd prepare individual packets for him to take along, but I hadn't done that in over 6 months. On a whim during a cleaning spree, I'd even tossed out the leftover ingredients. Roxana said she put some medicine in your bag. You heard her say that, didn't you? I replied, surprised. He lowered his gaze slightly. Oh, I forgot. Bang! I closed the door and went inside. Chapter 10. The crew sent us a task card, requiring each couple to give their spouse a gift. Nicholas's choice was to make me a bowl of noodles by hand. The other participants smirked, finding his choice simple and insincere. But for me, it stirred up some memories. On my 2nd birthday after we got married, he was away on a business trip, not wanting to fuss. I made myself a bowl of noodles. Just as I was about to eat, the door opened, and he appeared. Travel-worn but there. I squealed in surprise. And before he even took off his shoes, he kissed me. We ended up tangled on the bed, inseparable. Later, I complained that my noodles had gone to waste. And he kissed me again, promising, I'll make you a bowl myself next year. On my 3rd birthday, he flew to Paris with Roxana for work. On my 4th, he forgot entirely. Nicholas carefully placed the bowl of noodles in front of me. Looking at this bowl of noodles, 3 years late, I felt a complex mix of emotions. He'd never cooked before, not even used a microwave. I honestly couldn't understand what was going on with him. Was it guilt for not saving me that day? But he'd chosen Roxana over me so many times before. Was it because I was no longer so eager to please him? But he'd always taught me the importance of moderation. Was it because I'd chosen divorce twice? That made no sense. He'd explicitly asked me to do so. After thinking it over, I figured it was just for the show's effect. With his usual calm smile, he held out the chopsticks. This is my first bowl of noodles. Try it. I took the chopsticks and took a bite. He watched me intently. Too salty. The noodles are too soft. Not very good. I set down the chopsticks, pushed the bowl aside apologetically, and reached for an orange from the fruit plate. His smile stiffened slightly. Then don't eat it. I'll learn and make you another one someday. I ate a slice of the orange and responded with a simple oh. Then, I pulled out a small box. Here's your gift. See if you like it. His eyes lit up as he opened it. Inside was a blue striped tie. You always have great taste. He smiled, putting it on. Feeling slightly awkward, I decided to confess. I asked the staff to buy it for me. He froze, mumbling, You used to pick out everything for me yourself. Pick out. These oranges are delicious. You should try one. I popped the last slice into my mouth. Chapter 11. The final task of the show was for the 3 couples to hike a mountain together. The weather was perfect on the way up, sunny and calm. But once we reached the peak, a storm quickly rolled in, bringing thunder and rain. The crew was well prepared, assigning a staff member to each participant for safety, so there was no real panic. Nicholas led the group, occasionally looking back at me, shouting something I couldn't hear over the rain. The downpour intensified, and visibility dropped to nearly 0, even within a meter. At one point, the staff member with me twisted her ankle, so we had to slow down. Fortunately, though it was a mountain path, the route wasn't complicated. I helped her along, and we made it back to the base safely. As soon as we sat down, the director rushed in, asking if we'd seen Nicholas on the way. We were stunned. Wasn't he at the front? He should have been back long before us. The director scratched his head anxiously. He did come back, but when he saw you hadn't arrived, he went back up the mountain despite everyone trying to stop him. He was like a madman. No one could hold him back. I stood there, stunned. The other couples came over to comfort me, assuring me that several staff members had gone to look for him, so he'd be fine. I stared silently at the mountain. 2 hours later, the door suddenly swung open, and a drenched figure appeared. The moment he saw me, he rushed over and pulled me into a tight embrace. Helen, thank God you're all right. I was so scared. I've never been so scared in my life. Nicholas, cold and shivering, clung to me, his body trembling not just from the cold, but from fear. Then, he collapsed, fainting in my arms. The staff explained that he charged up to the summit in the storm, fearing I'd fallen, and even left the main path to search along the cliffs. Nicholas had a high fever for 2 days, deliriously calling out my name. Everyone was moved by his devotion. No matter what, he truly loves you, the ordinary woman said. Only in extreme situations does true love reveal itself, the singer's wife added. I stayed by his side, helping him drink water, wiping his brow. We looked like an old couple, deeply devoted after years together. When he finally woke up, I was dozing by his bedside, feeling a gentle hand on my face. I opened my eyes. He was smiling at me, his gaze misty with emotion. Wandering in the rain like that, I finally realized just how much I love you. Thank God you're safe. Thank God I have the chance to say this. Helen, when this show is over, let's go home and start fresh, okay? He hugged me tightly. I lifted my hand and patted his back. 2 days later, in the final show interview, I chose divorce for the 3rd time. Everyone looked shocked. The moment Nicholas saw my choice, he froze like a statue. He didn't move for a long time. Chapter 12. After we got home, I spent 2 days in bed, resting completely. On the 3rd evening, as I was stretching by the window, the door lock beeped, and Nicholas walked in with his bag. He greeted me as if it were the most natural thing, heading into the closet, as if this were just another normal day, as if he hadn't been gone for 2 months. Frowning, I followed him to the closet door. I know what you're going to say. Helen, I don't agree to the divorce. He spoke calmly, slowly removing his tie and watch. That was just a show, a performance, meant to generate publicity. It doesn't count. Rolling up his sleeves, he reached out to take my hand. I instinctively pulled away. I told you, I'm not used to it anymore. His eyes trembled slightly, but he spoke softly. No matter, we can take it slow. We're married. There's nothing we can't work through. If I've done anything intentional or unintentional to hurt you, I apologize. I'm sorry. I lowered my head, letting out a quiet laugh. What makes you think a single sorry erases everything that's happened between us? He looked at me quietly. Very well, Helen, if you have grievances or resentments, you can take them out on me however you want. But not divorce. Nicholas is a man of swift action. He suddenly stopped having urgent work. His phone and meetings became rare, and he began focusing on the plants at home, studying how to use the appliances, even watching cooking videos. My livestream job was abruptly cancelled, and a new influencer took over. I'd expressed my dislike for live streaming countless times before, but he always dismissed me with, "Your contract belongs to the company. Follow company arrangements." But now, it ended in a snap, right before the Singles Day shopping event. At night, he continued sleeping in the guest room without complaint. Helen, you know I'm very patient. Each morning, I found him in the kitchen. He picked up cooking quickly. His noodles were nearly perfect now, but I never tasted them. The show had ended. There was no need to continue. Yet he seemed fixated, placing a steaming bowl on the table every morning. When it grew cold, he'd quietly dispose of it. Roxana called him once. He was trimming orchids, handling them with great care, yet his words were as cold as ice. Roxana, I told you not to call when I'm at home. If you continue overstepping, there's no place for you here. For all his efforts, I remained indifferent, detached. We barely spoke. I couldn't understand his sudden change, but I was too tired to ask, or even wonder. I simply didn't care. This calm, steady detachment had been forged through countless nights of heartache. It had become my impenetrable armor. Life is fair. It doesn't give blessings without reason, nor does it allow suffering without reward. Living under the same roof, we were like strangers. He stubbornly, slowly tried to reach me. One evening, he came knocking on my door, clutching his head, his migraine flaring up. The usually composed man looked almost childlike in his vulnerability. I called Roxana over immediately. When he saw her arrive, panting from the rush, his face was ashen. The delicate facade he'd built over these past weeks cracked ever so slightly. Lying in bed, I could hear Roxana's soft sobs downstairs. Mrs. Wang said you wanted me to come. The next morning, I went downstairs and found Nicholas calmly eating noodles at the table. He had one bowl in front of him, and another across from him. Steam wafted from the noodles. They looked perfectly appetizing. I ignored it, went to the fridge, and took out some milk. But then I heard his cool, even voice. You remember that your money and contract are tied to the company, don't you? I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. He looked up and smiled warmly. Helen, we're not getting divorced, are we? Chapter 13. The show aired. Thanks to the buzz around celebrity divorce, it immediately grabbed massive attention. Initially, the online comments about me were overwhelmingly negative. Scripted drama. For sure, she'd actually get a divorce? I'll eat dirt if they really split. She's desperate for money, couldn't get traffic with live streaming, so now she's going for reality TV. Can't the government crack down on these trashy celebrities? Greedy and fake. But as more scenes of Nicholas's interviews and interactions were released, some people's attitudes began to shift. This Mr. Wang comes off as such a macho chauvinist. I wouldn't put up with him either. But he's giving her money, right? She gets the money and still wants emotional value? But Helen earns her own money too. Without her influence, her husband's media company wouldn't be so famous, would it? Still feels staged. Helen doesn't even look sad when she talks about divorce. I get where she's coming from. It's that kind of numb, heart-dead feeling. That's exactly how I felt when I divorced my husband. God, middle-aged men who lecture all the time are the worst. I'm kind of sympathizing with Helen now. Leaving might be best. Some people analyze the situation more objectively. Even if this isn't just for show, divorcing would be tough. They're too financially tied together. When it comes to business, a celebrity won't outmaneuver a businessman. Most of her assets are likely under his company, and if she tries to divorce, she'd probably have to walk away with nothing or next to nothing. Each night, I leaned back in bed, scrolling through the comments, witnessing the various facets of human nature unfold. Nicholas barely paid attention to the online opinions, whether positive or negative. In his eyes, media and e-commerce thrive on traffic. Bad comments are only a problem if no one comments at all. In fact, the more polarized the public opinion, the better. The more people argued, the more traffic it generated, until a video clip appeared online. It showed the moment when Roxana and I fell into the river and Nicholas chose to save Roxana. The internet exploded. What's going on here? Straight out of a novel, saving the assistant over the wife? Are you kidding? Helen was pushed by that woman, and he didn't kick the aggressor out but saved her? Divorce is a must. Anything less would be a betrayal to us. I'm trying not to curse, but I'm about to burst. Imagine what Helen's gone through behind closed doors if this happened right in front of us. Public opinion was black and white. The moment my vulnerable position was exposed, people were outraged, seeing it as a classic story of pet the mistress, discard the wife. Someone dug up footage from my debut 8 years ago, comparing it to scenes from the show. Back then, at 19, I was articulate and always smiling. I grinned radiantly on stage, every pore exuding excitement and hope for life. Now, I was silent and tired, my whole being a picture of exhaustion and forced smiles, with no light in my eyes. Helen was top of our class before she joined the industry. She even won national awards in math competitions and was going to be a researcher. To us that year, she was the queen of smiles. Marriage really does have a huge impact on a woman. People flooded my social media with questions. Did you end up leaving? This isn't just an act, right? You really want to leave, don't you? In a rare move, I replied on social media. Divorce involves many factors and is currently in process. Viewers speculated, then flocked to Nicholas's company's live streams, demanding answers. The numbers grew daily, reaching over 1 million at its peak, with people clamoring for Nicholas to respond. And he did. Being the businessman he was, he wouldn't miss this chance to capitalize on the wave of attention. In the live stream, he wore a simple sweatshirt, his usually impeccable hair left casually down. As he earnestly and solemnly reflected on his marriage, he admitted that in recent years, his focus on work had caused him to neglect me, leading to a marital crisis. But he loved me all along. Otherwise, he wouldn't have gone on the show with me to save our marriage. As for saving his assistant, he explained that she had a psychological condition that caused her to faint in water. While I was a strong swimmer, off camera, many staff members were already rushing to help. He believed that any reasonable, conscientious man would have made the same choice. Finally, he ended on a sincere and somber note. I will not divorce. I love Helen, and I believe she loves me too. Her talk of divorce on the show was precisely to give us a chance. Otherwise, in today's world of marital freedom, no one could stop her if she truly wanted a divorce, right? Marriage isn't easy, and we should cherish it. I watched his tear-filled eyes on my phone screen, feeling a desolate emptiness inside. The online response was mixed. Public opinion had become divided. In an era where traffic is king and people are jaded by deception, it's hard for anyone to fully trust public figures. Some began to question his words. Right, if she really wants a divorce, what's stopping her? Why are people earning a few thousand a month worrying about a millionaire's marriage? At this critical juncture, the ordinary woman from the show went live. With a vague, secretive tone, she said, Sister Helen and I had a deep conversation. She regretted not setting up a property separation when she got married. Some internet sleuths pieced together the crucial details. So it's not that she doesn't want a divorce, it's that she can't. If she divorces, she'll lose everything. Even if she hasn't always been the main actress, Helen's been in enough films and shows, she should have her own assets, right? So what? You think a celebrity can outsmart a seasoned businessman? With a few moves, he could turn her personal assets into company assets. Oh my God, she'd be giving up money, a home, her whole life. Divorce. If she doesn't, I'm boycotting every Wang Group product. A reality show about divorce had led to a massive online movement, evolving into an unprecedented level of consensus. Divorce. Everyone was rooting for it. In recent years, economic downturns and slow social progress had left many people feeling down, yearning for an outlet for their frustrations. Marriage is a topic everyone can relate to. Unlike ordinary marriages, celebrity marriages are the only ones open for public entertainment, judgment, and critique. Everyone is a participant. Everyone is a judge. Over the next few days, people flooded Nicholas's company live streams with protests and boycotts, indiscriminately attacking his media company and traditional businesses. The Wang Group's stock price plummeted. Even the autobiography Nicholas had once written to boost his image was dissected by the media, with every line scrutinized and mocked. And Roxana? Overseas fans uncovered that her Stanford University master's degree was actually from an affiliated institution, a lesser credential than she'd claimed. Chapter 14. Nicholas finally agreed to the divorce. In front of millions of witnesses, he hired a divorce lawyer to fairly divide and allocate our shared assets from over the years. He didn't shortchange me. Not only did I receive my due, but I also got half of all his assets. Staring at the numbers on the contract, I was genuinely shocked. I hadn't realized Nicholas had amassed such wealth, nor did I expect him to give me so much. Some of these assets could easily have been protected beyond my reach. In the end, a divorce drama sparked by a reality show finally concluded after 2 intense months. And the result? I emerged as a billionaire single woman. The next time I saw Nicholas was at the Civil Affairs office. Toward the end of the ordeal, he was swamped with meetings and decisions, leaving him no time to come home. He truly had no time. Once he agreed to the divorce, I immediately had all his belongings packed and sent to his office. I didn't even see him. Now, it was deep winter, and snow had started falling during the day. We approached from opposite directions, getting out of our cars. In the swirling snow, we silently met each other's gaze. He wore a black wool coat, dusted with white flakes on his hair and shoulders, his figure leaner and his features sharper. Helen. His voice was hoarse. I smiled at him gently. I heard there's a snowstorm coming. Mr. Wang, let's hurry inside. His eyelashes fluttered slightly, and he gave a bitter smile. You won't even call me by name anymore? These past few weeks, you wouldn't see me or take my calls. We're still husband and wife. Must you be so heartless? This divorce was forced by circumstances. Helen, just give me some time, and I'll win you back. He stopped mid-sentence, staring at me in surprise. I'd begun rolling up my sleeves, first the coat, then the sweater, until I exposed a patch of skin on my arm. He stood there, puzzled. I held out my arm. Look, my skin breaks out in hives. He glanced down, confused by the red spots on my skin. I spoke calmly. Whenever you speak, I break out in these red spots. I went to the doctor, and they said it's an allergy. The best remedy is to avoid the allergen. So, Mr. Wang, please spare me the words. My whole being, my heart, my body, can no longer tolerate you. This is the end. May we each find peace. His eyes widened, his lips moving as if to speak, but then he fell silent, struggling to make any sound at all. I adjusted my scarf and walked inside. Nicholas's hand trembled slightly as he signed the papers. His face blank, his expression dazed. I remained calm and composed throughout. As we stepped outside, the snowstorm had arrived. Huge snowflakes fell thickly from the sky, blanketing the world in a layer of white. I walked across the snow toward my car. Helen, Nicholas called after me. I turned, seeing his eyes red-rimmed. When did you start being allergic to me? 6 months ago. That long? He wavered, lowering his head in resignation. Suddenly, he looked up, a new realization dawning on him. So you had already decided on divorce? Standing in the snow, hands in my pockets, I looked back at him. He wore a strange expression as he spoke, his voice muffled by the swirling snow around him, sounding distant and hollow. You willingly went on the show to create public pressure and force me into a divorce. Not just a divorce, but one that maximizes your gain. That video, it was your doing, wasn't it? The ordinary contestants live stream, too. Each incident was perfectly timed. How foolish I was, reminding you to express your desire for divorce. Worried you wouldn't play along, but all along, you were plotting to leave me. I said nothing, standing in the snow, enduring the allergic reaction, giving him the respect he deserved. After all, he had given me $1 billion fortune. When he finished, he lowered his head. After a long pause, he asked in a trembling voice, Helen, do you truly no longer love me? I smiled gently. Yes, I don't love you anymore. Didn't I tell you that from the beginning? I turned and walked into the depth of the snow. The anticipated storm had blanketed the world in white, erasing all traces, as if it had always been pure and unmarked. Gazing at the vast, snowy expanse, I sighed. So clean, so white. Epilogue. From that day onward, Nicholas became trapped in a desperate obsession. He was haunted by an uncontrollable urge to see Helen. Yet, he didn't dare face her, nor utter a single word to her. Just the thought that his voice could trigger such a reaction in her was enough to plunge him into a depth of despair akin to hell. So he watched her from afar, silently and invisibly, in the dead of night, from his car parked below her apartment, from the back of a crowded event, from the audience at a recording studio. Since leaving him, Helen's career had soared. Their divorce story earned her the support of countless women who related to her pain. Mothers, sisters, all rallied around her, offering advice and unwavering support for her future. Her smile returned, radiant, warm, and full of strength. She began taking roles in films centered on women's empowerment, joined women's advocacy programs, and even became a talk show host. Watching her on screen, speaking with confidence and grace, Nicholas felt a strange mixture of familiarity and alienation. He remembered how he used to criticize her in front of others, calling her slow and unrefined. Most of the time, she'd just listen, remaining silent without retorting. But now, watching her on screen, he felt an intense strangeness. And yet, at the same time, something about her felt right, as if this was who she had been all along. His mind drifted to the first time he saw her. She had sat in his office, her eyes red and her demeanor cautious. Her timid manager had explained how a contract dispute had left Helen in trouble, pleading with him to step in. He had intended to refuse. But in that moment, he caught a glimpse of Helen's eyes, shining like diamonds. Against his usual judgment, he agreed to help. He witnessed her joy transform into the purest, most radiant smile. as if a flower had bloomed after the rain. After they got together, Helen once asked him curiously, "Why did you choose me? I thought you'd choose someone else." "Who else?" he'd asked. "Someone like Roxana," she replied, tilting her head thoughtfully. Roxana? At the time, he found it laughable. How could that meticulously crafted, perfect woman ever compare to Helen's vibrancy and warmth? Yet, in a moment of heated passion with Helen, he found himself in bed with Roxana. It only happened once. He had been drunk, recalling only fragmented memories. He'd thought it was Helen, only to wake up and find Roxana beside him, her clothes torn on the floor, blood spots staining the white sheets. Nearly frantic, he offered her money, on the condition that she leave the company and keep the incident a secret. Roxana had cried, saying he'd been too rough, that it had been her first time. She swore she wouldn't tell a soul, only begging him not to make her leave. She didn't want to lose her career after giving up her purity. Seeing her, usually so poised and elegant, now stripped bare and vulnerable, he softened. After that night, he couldn't face Helen properly. She was so pure, so passionate, so full of hope for the future, unwilling to accept any stain in her life. Unconsciously, he began avoiding her, working late nights at the office, as Roxana had promised. She never brought up that night again. She continued to work diligently and communicate openly, never expecting anything more in return. Her compliance stirred a faint guilt within him. Helen, however, grew increasingly anxious over his sudden coldness, her emotions gradually destabilizing. Around that time, a young director, fresh off an international award, contacted her manager, offering her a lead role in a promising new film. Back then, Helen and Nicholas were secretly married. The young director, unaware of their relationship, openly expressed admiration and excitement for Helen in front of Nicholas. He'd hesitated. It was clear that, if Helen took this role, her career would ascend to a new level, one that would take her far beyond her current standing. But would she still be content to stay by his side? That evening, when he returned home, he found her watching an interview with the young director on TV, her eyes brimming with admiration. It was the same look that young director had worn earlier, so he declined the role for her, without her knowing. Afterward, he found it even harder to face her, though he wouldn't admit the darkness in his heart. Instead, he took a foolish, absurd approach. He began criticizing her, putting her down, comparing her to Roxana, whom he knew she felt insecure about. He watched as she slowly fell into self-doubt, watched as she grew resentful and jealous of Roxana, watched as her whole world revolved around him, watched as her smile faded, bit by bit. This brought him a twisted sense of comfort, even a perverse satisfaction. When she'd argued with him over switching agents, he'd suspended all her resources for 6 months in anger. During that time, she was like a withered flower, consumed with anxiety, until one day, she'd knelt in front of him, tears streaming down her face, begging him not to punish her anymore. He was stunned. That wasn't what he wanted. In a panic, he'd hastily forgiven her and left the room. Looking back, he realized that was when things began to change. She no longer got jealous, no longer cared about his interactions with Roxana, no longer looked at him with those wide, adoring eyes. She became quiet, calm, indifferent. On his birthday, she didn't acknowledge it at all. No gift brought to the office, no call. He deliberately stayed out late, only to come home and find her sound asleep. An uncontainable surge of emotion overtook him, and he all but threw himself on her, seeking solace through intimacy. But she had turned him away. From that night on, they drifted even further apart. When his agent proposed a divorce reality show, he'd agreed without hesitation. He didn't care about the show itself. Deep down, he yearned for time alone with Helen. He wanted to use the show's setup to create a scenario where he could truly seek reconciliation, to humble himself and win her back. He was sure she would be moved, thrilled. She would rejoice at their reunion, finally realizing how precious it was to regain what was almost lost. They would overcome their hardships and return to how they once were. But things didn't go as planned. She continued, step by step, to move away from him, He tried to convince himself that Helen was merely following the show's script. But that night, watching her laugh freely with the other guests under the night sky, her eyes sparkled so brightly that the stars themselves seemed dim. He panicked. The river incident with Roxana, he hadn't lied. Partly, it was about saving a life. And partly, he'd wanted to make amends to Roxana. He'd thought of it as closure. Something to finally ease his guilt so he could fire her with a clear conscience. And the day he went searching for Helen on the mountain in the rain was the first time he truly felt fear, deep, gut-wrenching fear. It forced him to confront his heart. When Helen chose divorce for the last time, he felt as though a premonition he'd been ignoring had finally come true. After the show ended, he resolved to do whatever it took, soft methods, hard methods, to prevent her from going through with the divorce. But things spiraled out of his control. The online storm intensified, cornering him until he had no choice but to divorce her. Roxana was eventually let go. She had knelt on the ground, sobbing, saying she'd been disgraced and had nowhere else to go, begging him to keep her on. At that moment, he didn't hear a word. All he could see was Helen on her knees, crying and pleading. He doubled over in pain. In a last plea, Roxana asked for financial support, citing that she'd given him her first time, asking him to provide her with some security for the future. He wanted nothing more to do with her, so he irritably left the negotiations to his staff. It was then that he received a message from Helen. With trembling hands, he opened it. There were no words, just a screenshot. It was a set of photos Roxana had sent Helen 6 months earlier. Images of the aftermath of that night, the torn dress, the blood-stained sheets, his naked body. Shocked, enraged, devastated, he stormed into the adjacent office and, in front of several assistants, unleashed his fury on Roxana. He screamed, consumed with rage. "You promised you wouldn't tell. Why did you betray me? You vile woman. Why did you ruin me?" Roxana left on a stretcher, her face a bloodied mess, her eyes barely visible, and all she could do was make incoherent noises from her throat. In the end, Roxana was left disfigured, blind in one eye. Nicholas was ordered to pay $860,000 in damages and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Though he could have bought a suspended sentence for a higher sum, he refused, choosing to serve his time rather than give her another penny. 2 years later, the day before his release, Nicholas packed up his belongings and sat obediently on his small bench, watching TV. A prestigious film award ceremony was playing on the screen. Under the dazzling lights, Helen, in a stunning gown, held a trophy in her hands, expressing her gratitude. With her star-like eyes, she smiled and said, "I want to thank my love." Beside her, exchanging a warm smile, was the young director from years ago. He had found her. After all, Nicholas stared at the woman on the screen, blooming brighter than ever. He watched, unblinking, afraid to miss even a second. That night, lying on his prison cot, he listened to the faint singing from somewhere outside his window. Atonement upon the bitter sea, return to the path, understanding karma. In the silence, he shed 2 meaningless tears,